CRISPR technology. They're learning to go in and edit people's genomes now. And most of y'all probably know this. It's no big deal. But to me, it was a big deal looking at the ramifications, considering some of the issues pre-flood time that was going on in the world. And when you think about what we're doing now, we're messing around with genetics in the human being in such a way that it is foreseeable in the future a nightmare. Sure. That part of the problem of the sin in the first world was gene manipulation, we think, and problems with that. So I thought about that and realized how short of a time we got just from this aspect alone about where the human race is headed and all of the promises of what technology is going to do, the idea of singularity where humans merge with AI in such a way that we perpetuate the race for eternity, and all of the things that are projected not 100 years down the road, but in the coming decades. So I thought about how important our message is, to make sure we understand it and are grounded in it. And so tonight we're going to start looking at chapters 3 and 4. And really we could or chapters 2 and 3, excuse me. And also chapters 2 and 3. Forgive me for the way that I got this thing. I told y'all was the guinea pigs for this. I got lesson 3, chapter 2. And that will confuse you because you're thinking we're on lesson. It's really confusing. So forget about the word lesson. We're going to scratch that out of the board. I've been running Miss Danielle insane with revisions on this. So we're just going to be doing chapter 2 and chapter 3, which would be lesson 3 and lesson 4. That's terribly confusing. Mary was looking at me today saying, "Why did you do that?" I had a reason, but now looking back, it was terrible. So it's called the gospel in type and antitype. Yes, just forget the I'm going to not use that no more. But this will benefit the next group I do this with. It's going to be chapter 2. Chapter 2. Page 25. Thank you all so much. We did introduction in chapter 1. Now we're doing chapter 2 and chapter 3. Next week, chapter 4, 5, and 6. And the last week, chapter 7 and 8. I know, I'm telling you, I know y'all don't hate me for this. But I mean. Okay, so are you good though? You know where we are? Okay. Chapter 2, the gospel in type and antitype. That's the subtitle. Now, do y'all understand type and antitype, what that means? It's simply theological jargon. And it just means the type is pointing forward to the antitype or antitypical. You always hear the antitypical Lamb of God, or the antitypical Day of Atonement. That's what we call the 23 years. It's a word that a type is what it was back in the Old Testament, and the antitype is what it's pointing forward to. And everything in the Old Testament is type. It's all type.
And I'm guessing
yeah, foreshadowing. The shadow and the substance you'll hear is called Christ. Like, this is my shadow, but I'm the substance. Type, antitype, foreshadowing the reality. There's different words to use for it. But everything in the Old Testament is type. There's nothing that's not. Everything is sanctuary language. Everything is sanctuary. All your stories, everything that's happened at the sanctuary is telling us of an antitypical application. This is why God had, if you think about it, from the time that they started writing stories, or the stories they even chose to write of the Old Testament, was a 4,000-year history. And all that they could write was from Genesis to Malachi. Those stories were chosen. There was so much history that happened, you could not write enough books. But those stories were chose for a particular purpose and reason. It wasn't like that was all that had happened in Israel. Can you imagine how much time fills your life? How many books you could write? So in the Old Testament, there was just, even in the New Testament, that little short period of time, you remember what the disciples said? There's not enough books that can contain what Jesus did. So the Old Testament is far more greater like that. So the stories chosen were chosen for a purpose and a reason to point forward to the work of Christ. So that's why we have to pay attention at what they're saying. So that's really what chapter 2 is going to be about, type versus antitype. And then chapter 3, we're going to start getting into the historic sketch of the 2300 years. Who began preaching it, these names you need to know, how it came about, and what it did to the world when the world heard it, and what it's going to do again to the world when the world hears it. So that's where we're going. So that's just a brief sketch. And so you know our procedure here. We're going to start going through it. If you have a comment of something that's in the lesson, let's bring it up and talk about it. So it begins with just talking about the Old Testament sanctuary. Right? Not a big deal. So the only question that I have out of that first red question after you get through the stages there, through the different readings, is what was the sanctuary in relation to the gospel? What does it say? Oh, Mary's got some.
Everything was found out through redemption.
There's a particular phrase I wanted to use. Close. No, that's close. There's a particular phrase used. That's why I underlined this, so you'll look in. Oh, there you go. It was a compact. We never think of it this way, but it is, right? It's a prophecy. The sanctuary message is a prophecy. It's part of Bible prophecy. That's why we like to use it so much. Or we don't use it as much as I think we should. So it was a compacted prophecy of the gospel. It was just boxed up in a unique way of presenting it. And it was really prophesying what God would do to save the human race. That simple. So the gospel is our focus then. When we're looking at the Old Testament, we're looking at the sanctuary, you cannot get your eyes off of that. You cannot lose focus that it's telling you something about the gospel. And if you lose that, the lesson already begins to allude to what happens when you lose. The next section says, antitype lost sight of, right? When you lose sight of the gospel, you lose sight of, or when you don't got your relationship correct and you're looking at the Old Testament, that's why you're reading the book of Leviticus, you're bored stiff. Or when you're going through stuff, in Deuteronomy, you're bored stiff. It's because you don't have the right sunglasses on. The right optics to look through, and if you do that, the whole Bible, you lose sight of its real meaning. And so it's a prophecy really pointing forward to the gospel. Every part was a symbol of him in that heading right there. So the next question says, in every part, the ritual service was a symbol of who? Yeah, easy one, right? It's the real secret of everything. But we're going to get, I'll wait because we're going to get into something next. The next, where it says the temple services. Yes, the temple services. It says Christ was the foundation of the life of the temple. Its services were typical of the sacrifice of the Son of God. The priesthood was established to represent the mediatorial character and work of Christ. The entire plan of salvation, the entire plan of sacrificial worship was a foreshadowing of the Savior's death. And so, in order to understand our heavenly high priest, where would you have to go to understand him better? Right, we usually think of the sanctuary only when we start drawing pictures, and I do it too because you need to know it, right? You go through here, and we draw all the little emblems, and we just kind of talk about it just in the symbols. But what this part is telling us is that the mediatorial work of the high priest is as symbolic as all of these. It's easy to look at the furnishings and say, oh, that was Christ in the laver, Christ at the altar. But to understand how the high priest and the priest worked and maneuvered in everything they picked up and everything they did. And when they walked over here and they did this and they put this on and they took this off and they washed their hands here, it is telling you something about the plan of salvation. So if you really want to have an exciting Bible study, go to the book of Leviticus and look up anything on high priest. Just do a word search in high priest and start reading
and looking at the movement of the high priest. Why does he stop and wash his hands? And why does he do this? And you're going to start getting an energized Bible study. You're going to have something really wonderful to look at. If you start viewing everything in the Old Testament, especially all the maneuverings of the priesthood, not just the symbols here, but their maneuverings, what they were doing, why they were doing it, it's telling you a story. It's telling you something about the work of Christ. And that is really, you're not going to exhaust that topic when you're looking in the Bible. You're going to have a great time doing that. So as Adventists, we have to do it. Or the idea of talking about our heavenly high priest means nothing. People are like, oh yeah, Jesus is the high priest. That's usually what they say. Yeah, he's the high priest. We're like, oh no. Let me tell you what the high priest is. What he's done and what he's doing and what he's going to do. And well, where do y'all get that from? You got to know the tithe. Because they think you're just making it up. And I've heard that. And y'all just saying, no. The Old Testament is telling us. Well, what does that got to do with the high priest in Hebrews? It has everything to do with it. You don't know, it's the pattern. And so we look at the high priest and we understand the work of Christ, and then it validates what we say that he's doing. That's why these things are so incredibly important. Any questions at this point, or anything that you got out of the lesson?
Are visual props good to teach this message on a Bible study? There's so many I have printed off of a bunch.
Is the sanctuary, what the priest looks like, all the things about it. I've never really done too much with the sanctuary.
So the question is visual props good to use when you're studying this? I think they're excellent because it is a confusing topic because there's so much information and we haven't been properly grounded in it. So if you have, well, this is what I do with the high school at chapel. I take them through a visible representation of it and just walk them through the stages, but I don't just say, well, the screen represented this, or I take them through the procedure of what it meant, why they needed an altar.
You know, what it was for. What did it mean when the high priest took the blood to the base of the altar? What did it mean when the person laid his hand on the lamb and confessed over it? And that starts conveying the gospel. So I always use symbols. I go through it with people because it helps them to understand it.
And so once this next section that we're going to get into, it's called Our High Priest, Our Advocate. Most of your evangelical friends and Christian family members will follow you in the sanctuary. They'll grasp everything that we're talking about. There's nothing controversial about it. And they'll understand that the courtyard was the earth. That's not hard to teach. And that the altar was Christ. And the laver represented the cleansing that comes in the holy place. But really our job was to pick up the rest of the story and really get into our heavenly high priest, our advocate. And in order to do that, you really have to be able to understand the priesthood. And that's what we're doing here. That's what this lesson and the book you have is to help you understand more clearly the priesthood. And I suggest doing this, is creating your own Bible studies. The first set of lessons are going to be terrible. They always are. But as you give them, you're going to start refining, just like I'm doing y'all with this training manual. This is the first training manual that I've really laid out this way. And there's all kind of mistakes in it and things I do different, but that's okay. The next time I'll do it. So if you start thinking, how could I convey this message to others, and start making your own simple Bible studies, it's going to bless you. You know. And so that's all that our book is doing. So the question now, under this section, our high priest, our advocate. When the earthly sanctuary and its services came to an end, where did Jesus continue his work? Right? An important point to explain to people. Most of your Christian world believes that at Calvary's cross it ended, Jesus ascended to heaven, and end of story. They don't even know that there is another entire, that was really only phase one of the gospel.
And we've got the rest of the story. Oh, no. There's a phase 2, and there's a phase 3, and a phase 4 coming. There is this whole, it gets exciting when people start seeing this. Next question. What does the sanctuary message bring primarily to view?
Very center of Christ's work we have to do.
That's right. So, it's the very center of the work of Christ in behalf of men, his mediatorial priesthood work in the heavenly sanctuary. Do you think that now the little horn in Revelation 8, Daniel chapter 8 has a little more meaning? You know, usually we go to Daniel and we talk about the little horn that would think to change times and law. At least for me, that's the only part I ever went to. And to show that the law was changed and the Sabbath was changed by the little horn. It's very important to explain that. But when you read Daniel chapter 8, he takes it a step further and he talks about this whole system in the heavens being cast down to the ground. The priesthood that God has established is going to be trampled underfoot, and an earthly priesthood is going to be brought up in its place. And of course, we're told it's the papal church that is going to be head of this universal world priesthood. So when we're talking to people, we cannot leave that part out. That is like the most profound, important part. And then, of course, the changing of the law, the changing of the Sabbath, that also has implications in light of the sanctuary.
What do you do when you run into a Catholic?
If you run into...
If a Catholic wants to have a Bible study with you, and you sit down and you start telling them, I know this, I live it, so what's a good answer?
Well, the truth is the truth.
Sure.
Well, this is what you have to walk them through. And if you've been walking through the gospel with them first, that's going to be a mind blower. Then you go into the sanctuary, and at the same time you're going through amazing facts and doctrines. By the time you get to these deeper ideas, there's nowhere to go. There is
Only one heavenly high priest. El Papa is not the high priest of anything. And so it's easy to teach. To me, it's easier to prove my point against who the little horn of the beast is with this than standing alone about the change. I mean, the Sabbath and the law being changed is damning enough. But to show that this is what Luther in the 1500s was really upset about
was this earthly priesthood when there was clearly the priesthood of all believers in the heavenly high priest. That is like the death knell. And to a world that is working, this is working to our, it's working against us in our church. But 20% of the church is biblically literate. That's it. 80% of the church is biblically illiterate. 80% of the Seventh-day Adventist church. But that works to our advantage in the world now. Because the world don't know their Bible. And you come up with this stuff, and it's time now to start presenting this. But you see the importance of it. Why it's so important to show that this is the priesthood that we need to be focused on. So that's really chapter 2 was simply looking at teaching you. I'm just giving this thing, and this book was just intended to give you broad views for you to go back and dig into, looking at type versus antitype. Going back to the Old Testament, looking at the sanctuary, looking at the priesthood, studying it and finding its application in the life of Christ, and then being able to bring that in a Bible study as proof of why you believe that Jesus moved into the most holy place. Everything is about that. For 2,300-year prophecy. Everything we teach is leading us to that. And if you can show that there is legitimacy in the book of Hebrews as found in the Old Testament, and what they did in the Old Testament was telling us, and this is what you have to be able to do. You have to show all of the Old Testament fulfillment in the life of Christ.
they'll agree with you on. The courtyard, the feast of Passover, unleavened bread, all of that. And they're going to go, yeah, that's true. And then when you get into here, well, what about this? Does this not count? And we just do away with this part? And the rational mind is like, no, well, what happened? Enter our next section, what William Miller discovered.